Yo, Sleepy Sheepy here. Today we're going to do a complete breakdown on why the Putrescence Cleaver is as deadly as it is awkward. We'll be taking a look at the build, the weapon data, and how to turn this weapon into a monster in both 1v1 and multi-opponent scenarios. I hope you'll stick around to the end because the information here can make this weapon go from pretty much a meme to an absolute dream. Today's build should make everyone very happy because according to recent feedback, people really love both the Mushroom Crown and weapons that clip through the floors and walls. Fortunately, this build has both of those things going for it. We'll be running this build on an Arcane strength build, which means we have access to the Poison Hand, a weapon that allows us to buff stack like crazy while having access to a complementary moveset. Due to the high Arcane scaling of the Poison Hand, we'll lean our stat spread towards Arcane. However, the Cleaver will benefit from a 1.5 strength bonus when two-handing, so we'll end up having a stat spread that evens out a bit. The Poison Hand provides a passive AR buff that is triggered when poison gets procced nearby. This AR buff stacks multiplicatively with both the Mushroom Crown and the Kindred of Rot's Talisman, and helps us skyrocket our AR from 843 to about 1200 on the Putrescence Cleaver. If this wasn't enough, we're also going to be boosting our AR when we land successive attacks by using the Rotten Wing Sword Insignia Talisman. I found that pairing a fist weapon with a Great Axe can condition your opponent to expect no hyper armor, which becomes massively beneficial when you use the Spinning Guillotine Ash of War. This Ash of War is an absolute trade machine, and the high pressure that comes with the fists and the fast moveset helps make up for the lack of range that comes with the Cleaver. We'll dive into this more deeply when we look at the 1v1s, but the basic plan here is going to be to land the Poison Hand hits until we've procced poison. Then, when our AR has been buffed, we'll quickly swap over to the Cleaver and land a devastating Ash of War. Our talismans are all set up to improve this Ash of War since we've got Shard of Alexander to boost the damage of our skills, the Rotten Wing Sword Insignia to boost the successive attacks, and if you're not worried about poise, you can swap out the Bogoat Talisman for Millicent's Prosthesis and just basically go all in on the buff stacking. Please note that I am aware that you can self-proc poison if you want with poison perfumes. However, I found that using the fist weapon was a lot more fun, resulted in better opponent conditioning, and because the buff only lasts 20 seconds, I find it can be more optimal to land the buff while you're in the heat of battle, because your opponent won't end up just kind of playing passively and waiting it out, which can happen if you self-proc the buff. That pretty much covers the basics of the build. Next we'll look at the weapon data. You can skip this if you want, but I think you'll really learn something, and this will provide some insight into the most optimal play style for both the fists and the Cleaver. Before moving on, however, I would ask if you wouldn't mind considering subscribing. I am really trying to get to 10k subscribers before the end of the year, and that would help me out quite a bit. We'll start by looking at just the poise damage for both the fists and the Cleaver, and later on we'll look more closely at the frame data. The Cleaver has a guaranteed poise break on every hit other than the follow-up light attack chain hits. So this means that if you get hit by the second hit in the light attack chain, you can poise this hit if you have over 115 poise. However, this weapon also gets innate hyper armor, but we'll look at that in more detail as we look at the frame data. The Poison Hand has a few key values to look at, the first being the one-handed light attack, which does have 110 poise damage. This can be useful if you want to run the Cleaver in your main hand and do chip damage with the offhand fist. However, I do prefer the two-handed moveset of the Cleaver, and again, we'll look at that in the frame data section. Next, if you want to two-hand the fists, we can see that the running attacks have a few different poise values. The first light attack that comes out with the two-handed moveset comes out in 2 swings. The first swing does 30 poise damage, and the second swing does 120 poise damage. This means that you'll always poise break on the second hit if you land the first hit. Otherwise, a player with 121 poise can tank the second hit. The running heavy has a more consistent poise break, with both the first and second hit doing 132 poise damage. This means you'll break poise on every hit unless your opponent is running full goat. The two-handed moveset has an uncharged heavy that also comes out as 2 punches. However, these punches come out at the same time and they both do 132 poise damage, which is effectively doing 264 poise damage and is a guaranteed poise break. Next, we'll take a quick look at the frame data for both the fists and the Cleaver. The Poisoned Hand has an unreactable neutral light attack that comes out on frame 10, but this only does 30 poise damage on an opponent with the first hit, and we don't see the full poise damage of 120 until the frame of 17. This means that unless your opponent is poise chipped, you'll likely take a trade. If we compare this to the two-handed uncharged heavy, we'll see that we need to wait until frame 15, but the benefit of that is that we get a lot of damage. Note that we get a 115 damage motion value and a guaranteed poise break if both hits land. Lastly, we can compare the running light attack and the running heavy attacks. The running light attacks come out at frame 11, which is super fast, but it also suffers from the low damage, only doing 30 poise damage here. The running heavy is a bit slower, but is extremely likely to poise break since it does a lot more poise damage. For this reason, I recommend mixing up these two attacks to condition your opponent. Moving on, we'll look at the Cleaver. The first thing to note is that the one-handed attack actually comes out slower than the two-handed light attack. This one-handed version does get hyper armor earlier, but given the strength scaling for the weapon, there really isn't much of a reason to be using the one-handed light attack. We can also look at the two-handed uncharged heavy attack, which actually gets hyper armor one frame faster than the light attack, but comes out on frame 22. Due to the lackluster range of this weapon, the ability to roll catch with this slower attack is considerably nerfed. Finally, we're going to look at the main event, the Spinning Guillotine Ash of War. This is slow but has crazy hyper armor starting at frame 14 and surprising range. These factors make it basically the ultimate trading tool, especially given the fantastic roll catch ability that comes with the two different follow-up options. The first option is a heavy attack follow-up, which functions as a consistent roll catch if they roll out a stun. This attack lands squarely in your opponent's recovery frames. The second option is a follow-up L2, which is a roll catch for players that don't panic roll. These three attacks come out a little faster, which means that if a player delays their roll for more than 5 frames, they'll likely get caught by the first swing. Understanding how these two different follow-up options function allow you to see why the mix-up potential is so strong with this Ash of War, and it's absolutely crushing. Your ability to condition and read your opponent will also lead to massive damage, especially if you've boosted your AR with the poison first. Alright, so our first duel we're going to need to play pretty patiently and respect our opponent's hyper armor since they're using Rakshasa's Great Katana. They're going for a lot of the Weed Cutter Ash of War, but we do get a good read on when they're going to end it and do manage to get a little bit of poison chip in. We do manage to also get a poise break on one of our running attacks, and again we're going to need to wait out their Ash of War. We go ahead and throw a Freezing Pot to just kind of punish that Ash of War, and that's one good way you can actually prevent it from continuing endlessly. Now, we are going to need to look out for the Claws of Night, but we have gotten our Poison proc off, which means we're going to do a lot of damage, and here we do land that extra damage with our Ash of War on the Putrescence Cleaver. Our next opponent is going to be an Albnuric that's running Power Stance Great Spears, so this is probably not canon and something we don't see that often after the tracking nerf that came with one of the recent patches. Now we do get hit by a jumping light attack that comes out with a little bit of phantom range, but we are able to get a very quick poison proc and then switch over to the Cleaver. We go for our Ash of War and don't manage to get it to land, and go for just an offhand attack that does do a little bit of chip damage, and while our opponent is poisoned, they don't have time to heal and succumb to the poison. Our next opponent is going to be running a Great Katana, and we'll need to look out for the quick attacks, come in the form of mostly pokes, as well as the poise breaks. Fortunately, we're able to land a running heavy, avoid the damage from their sword dance, and get our poison proc in pretty fast. Now we swap over to the Cleaver, and we're going to go for trades at this point, but actually managed to land a running heavy, and then before we can land our backstab, the poison does the rest. Our next opponent's going to have a little bit of latency with us, but we'll do our best to avoid the phantom range that comes with especially the running heavy attack on their greatsword. Here we try to go for a punish with the Cleaver. We go for a quick swing with the offhand poisoned hand, and don't get it to connect, and look out for their incantation. Now here we go for an offhand swing, doing a little bit of chip damage, and going in for an attack with the Cleaver. Do manage to get it to connect, and here they go for their Ash of War, which sets us up nicely for a backstab, which does most of the damage, but not quite all of it. We swap back over to the poison hand, the Cleaver, and then we get a backstep attack, and here we just switch back to the poison hand for the final bit of HP. Our next opponent is going to be running a Twin Blade, which can do quite a bit of damage, and it'll be a lot better to trade with it if we're using the Cleaver rather than the fists, but we'd really like to get that poison proc nice and early, so we're going to try to whiff punish with some running light attacks. This is definitely a good way to go, and we do land a running heavy followed up by heavy attack that does most of their HP, and then successfully trade with that using our Ash of War. Our first invasion is going to be in the Catacombs, and this one was definitely a fun one. It involves 2 players and a random blue that comes in. We're going to start things off by trying to get our opponents frostbitten. This is going to be a good way to boost our physical damage, which comes with all of our weapons, essentially. I believe the Cleaver is actually split damage with magic as well as physical, but the poison hand is definitely going to be doing pure physical damage. So just Any way to just give us a little bit of an edge will be great, and at this point a blue has come into the world. They're starting off with a fully charged heavy, which is kind of funny, and they do have a fingerprint shield, so we're going to swap over to the hammer talisman in hopes of breaking their guard, which is pretty likely on a weapon like a fist type weapon, since those do a lot of stance damage. And here we can see the benefit of the hammer talisman, and it actually comes so fast that it surprises us, and we need to roll away before we can get the riposte. So we are trying to kind of play footsie on this little falling bridge thing, which I thought was actually pretty cool. It was a fun place to fight, hopefully not making anybody motion sick, but we get our opponent to quite low HP, use our Ash of War after getting the poison proc, and we're able to shut down the blue. Now we're just focused on this phantom here, as the host has backed up quite a bit. They go for a heal, but probably accidentally end up using their FP flask, and we get a backstab in that moment. Now, we did have a little bit more time with the host on the falling platform, but to avoid motion sickness, we will be skipping up to the end, where we go for a jumping heavy to get the poison proc, and then they go for their Ash of War. We go for a reverse jump and just set up a jumping light attack with the one-handed moveset on the Great Axe. Our next invasion is going to be real quick, where we start off with the Cleaver equipped, and somebody just goes for Hand of Melania right in our face. So we throw a sleep pot at the ground and then go for our Ash of War, and here we land a couple of the hits. We don't manage to finish them off. We probably would have been able to if we had been buffed by our poison, but that's okay. It's not a big deal. They're at pretty low health. They go for Hand of Melania with very low HP, and we catch them out of the air with our Cleaver and swap over to the two-handed moveset of the Poison Hand. Now we do need to look out for the spells a little bit, but we're able to rush in and apply quite a bit of pressure before the host catches up with us. And we go for a trade with the heavy attack. We get our poison buff in and swap back over to the Cleaver. Now they do get a chance to heal, but it's kind of too little too late, as we run in for a running heavy and then follow it up with a ravioli step. And here, as Kevin does join us with their Ash of War, we're able to backstab that successfully and get a nice roll catch attempt with our Ash of War before they actually even get their roll out. Our next invasion is going to have a little bit of a story. We start out by seeing a player that has almost no armor on and a shield to buff themselves. This is a very scary sight, so we're going to climb up this ladder, and here we see why this was so scary, as we get hit by Dragon Breath, and it does almost 2000 HP. So we decide to just kind of hang out up top. We don't want to rush down there into an area with no PvE and pretty much no escape, and we're going to hang out with the Great Bow and wait for them to go up the ladder. Now, we don't really want to finish the host in this moment. We're really just focused on that player with no armor, because they're the most dangerous one, and they took a lot of our HP at the beginning, so we'd like to take a lot of theirs now. We do manage to collect them with the Great Bow, and then we can swap back over to our two-handed moveset on the Poisoned Hand and get ready to use the Colossal Weapon, or rather the Great Axe. So we do get poison buff due to the poison from our opponent, which does work for us, and we can swap over to the Cleaver. And as this player comes in for a running heavy on a Colossal Sword, we can actually successfully trade with that with the Hyper Armor on the Cleaver's Ash of War. So yeah, if you weren't convinced that that's a good Ash of War, I hope that changed your mind, because the Hyper Armor is just absurd. Now, we do have our opponent here who's got a Rune Arc, but also a Mushroom Crown, so some things you like to see, some things you don't, and we're going to go ahead and get our Poisoned Hand out and do a bit of trading with them, as they are very intent on using their Ash of War, which is going to be doing a lot of poison and rot buildup, but we're able to just kind of get in, get out. We are now buffed with our poison proc, and we can go ahead and heal that, get our FP back to full as our opponent does finish off the PvE, and now we're just going to try to do a bunch of damage with the Cleaver. So we do land one hit with the Cleaver, then our opponent continues to go for their Ash of War, so we're kind of just going to wait this out. We don't need to, you know, eat the whole thing, and we are going to see if we can land our Ash of War a little bit. We do land a few of the hits, but our poison buff has worn off, so at this point we're just going to go back to the Poisoned Hands, and that's kind of the play. Just you switch back and forth. They have a hard time knowing what's coming. You can pull out massive Hyper Armor and massive damage real quick, or you can just go for the Poisoned Hand quick hits and deliver a lot of damage that way. So before we can get the Cleaver back out, we do finish off our opponent. This next invasion was a bit of a tricky one. We had a couple light rolling players. The first one is going to be using some bleed-based weapons, so we do need to look out for that, but fortunately we're able to shut them down very, very quickly, as the Poisoned Hand puts in quite a bit of work, and we're able to just apply a lot of pressure before the host comes up. But this is not the only light rolling player we're going to need to deal with, so we're going to back off, try to get our HP back to full, and just kind of see what comes our way. Now, we are going to try to focus the Phantom before we go for the host, just because that's my playstyle, but sleep pots are very much going to be our friend, because one player has almost no armor on, and the other player has the Divine Beast Helm, which really lowers your focus. So both players are going to be very easily slept, and especially the light rolling player, that's going to be one way we can actually do damage to them, because we don't have the best connection with them either. So if we can get them slept and stationary for a short period of time, we can try to do a bunch of damage. We can also see that that player has heal from afar, which is not great. It's like pretty tough to actually catch up with a player like that, and also they can just kind of hang back and heal the host if you're trying to focus the host. So, you know, it's a tricky scenario to be dealing with for sure. We're going to back off and heal our Frost, as well as get our HP to full. And yeah, we can see that like the whole plan of the Phantom is to just hang out, occasionally do chip damage, heal the host when necessary, and never get hit. But we do have other plans for them, and that involves some sleep pots, so we are going to toss that out. Here, the Phantom and the host both get slept. We're going to focus on the Phantom. We get about 400 damage in just with some running light attacks, and we are getting some chip build-up with the poison, which is great. So we're kind of happy to take trades if we can actually do some damage on the Phantom. And yeah, we continuously just want to make sure we don't get our Frostbitten procced, and then we also want to make sure that our health is topped up if we know that we're going to be going for some trades. So here we go, do manage to poise break the host, and are really just trying to find an opportunity to get some more damage in on the Phantom. So now we do get the poison proc. They are at about half health, and here as they decide to heal the poison, we can go for just a jumping light attack with the Cleaver, and that's going to be enough to finish off the Phantom. So finally, it's just a one-on-one with host, and we can do what we came to do, which is get our poison proc and use our Ash of War when possible. So we get that poison proc. It's not too difficult, and hoping to use our L2 button, but fortunately the poison beats us to the punch, and we come out with the victory. Our next invasion is going to be a fun one. I definitely enjoyed the kind of moods of these players. So the first one is going to be taunting me with their shield and going for some spins, and potentially going for the Ash of War on the Blasphemous Blade while they collect some HP from PvE that's just kind of dying in the background. So we go ahead and go for a jumping attack, and we're doing a lot of stamina damage here, and we're just kind of hoping to get the guard break. Here we do get the guard break, go for a soft swap on our Misericord right as we get the poison buff, so that means our crit is going to be doing a ton of damage, and there we're able to finish off that player. Now, because we did have Arcane, we were able to use some other weapons during invasion, so I did put on this Flowerstone Gavel, which I think is pretty cool because you can do, you know, 765 damage with one Ash of War before the opponent sees you, which is pretty strong. And we also have Moog's Spear, so I was just kind of feeling it out in this invasion, I would say, and was hoping to grab my Ash of War with Moog's Spear, but the PvE just kind of beat me to the punch again. Next, we'll have a group of 3 in a pretty small area, which is going to benefit several things that we have going on, namely the Ash of War on the Cleaver, as well as sleep pots, and we were also just able to kind of funnel everyone into the same area, which kind of is very helpful because we know where everybody is at all times. We don't have to worry about getting flanked. Now, the downside is they can throw hefty rot pots at us and go for things like Hand of Melania, so it's really a double-edged sword. We do get hit with the rot and almost die to Hand of Melania, but we back off and get a sleep pot thrown, and as they come in to be super aggressive, we kind of turn the tables as we literally flip over something that looks fairly similar to a table and get our Ash of War off. Now, we do need to back up again, try to get our HP back to full and our rot healed, but we've done some decent damage in the process and done a bit of a good trade. Here we were not hoping to throw that pot at the floor, but I believe possibly the stun of the volcano pot just made things a little bit more difficult, but we throw some more pots, we get hit by the chip damage of the volcano pot, and just try to figure out how we want to re-engage. We're also poisoned in this moment, so healing that poison probably would have been more beneficial, but we have the Cleaver out, and we're just trying to go for some hyper armor attacks since there's not a lot of space, and we go for an Ash of War. We're not able to continue it due to the wall, but we still finish off the Phantom, who gets politely teabagged by the host, and here we go for our L2, followed up by our R2, and finish off the host. Our last invasion is going to involve some players that are quite partial to hyper armor. We also see Sword of Night, which is a little bit scary, and just like a random torch for some reason. It's not even dark, don't really know what they were doing, but that's okay. We're going to go ahead and try to get our poison proc as quickly as possible and swap over to the Cleaver. So they are able to roll that successfully, and the host does try to summon a new Phantom in, but we need to just kind of go for our L2 button and see what we can do, landing quite a bit of damage on the Phantom. They are able to get away and heal, and they also land the Whirlwind Kick. So we need to back off, try to get our HP to a bit higher, but they're super aggressive, and we have the gavel pulled out, so we're just going to swing that until they fall, which they inevitably do, but you know, that works for us. Now here we're just trying to run around the host and grab that backstab. Unfortunately, we just get the grab and not the full backstab, but we do get a punish with a fully charged gavel attack, and we go ahead and swap back to our poison hand and begin the process on the host here. So we go for a running attack, don't get anything to connect, but we are getting a little bit of chip damage, and here as they go for their heavy attack, they're not able to get it to land. We're able to very successfully whiff punish them, and here as they go for their Ash of War, we go for ours and finish them off. That's going to be everything I've got for you today. If you wouldn't mind considering subscribing, I definitely would appreciate it. And if you like this type of like masterclass video where we take a deep dive on the frame data and everything, definitely let me know, because this is a new format for me.